right, we're recording. Welcome to Hockey Cards 101, Part 1. My name is Josh. I'm here with Troy. We are the hosts of the Hockey Cards Gongshow podcast. This is a special series where we hope to help new collectors learn a little bit about the hockey card collecting, I guess, and market. It's Hockey Card School, Troy.
It is. I wish someone had put one of these out when I first started collecting, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago with my kids. And then maybe back when I was a kid collecting and not having any idea what I was doing. But I think it feels a lot simpler back then, so you could pick up things pretty easily.
This is a special series that we're doing to help new collectors that are looking to get up to speed as quickly as possible. I think, Troy, whether that could be a whole wide spectrum of people, right? Whether you collected when you were a kid 20 years ago, then got away from the hobby, and now are trying to get back into it. Or if you're just a hockey super fan and want to continue the experience through collecting, or if you're more of a investment-minded person and have heard that there's an opportunity to make a little money in the sports cards world, hopefully we'll have a little bit of information for everyone. Okay, so also if you are a grizzled vet and somehow you've stumbled into this and you've already made millions buying and selling cards like Troy.
Yeah. Please share your secrets with me so I know how to make any money and not buy Kirill Kaprizov PSA 10s at the height of their value and then watch it slowly fall.
Sure. If that's the case, we want to be upfront and say this may not be the series for you, but you might learn something a little bit too, or maybe help sharpen the edges a little bit for your collecting experience, or you may help us point out things that we missed, or maybe things that you disagree with us from a best practice standpoint, or hopefully not, but from a factual standpoint. One of the things that I will mention is in future episodes of this series, I think what we're going to plan to do is have at least one segment of things that we missed or got wrong from the previous part. So, like I said, if you have some input as far as anything we missed or anything that we should have mentioned, should not have mentioned, please feel free to contact us on our socials, and we'll be sure to include that in future series. As far as an intro goes, Troy, how did we do?
I liked it. That was probably the longest intro we've had, but we needed to. We had to set some ground rules, let everyone know who this is for. We're hoping it's for the majority of people that, want to listen and kind of catch new things. Or if you're brand new, we hope this really helps. And like I said, I wish it was something that I found when I was starting my collecting journey.
I think that's a good segue into probably the most important question is, why are we doing this? Did we decide to create this, I guess, bonus series of our podcast? And there's a couple reasons. The first is pretty practical, I guess. We've had a number of people ask us to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's usually a good reason that are either getting back into the hobby or new to the hobby and wanted us to, I think, cover more of the foundational elements of hockey card collecting, or like I said, the basics, where I think Troy and I'm sure you'll agree with this, in our weekly show, we kind of assume or have the basic assumption that the audience knows the basics of the hobby.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And that's kind of an underlying assumption of our content and how we approach sort of planning out those shows. And I'll echo exactly what you've said already. I completely wish that there was something like this when I got back into the hobby a few years ago. Like most people, taken my lumps and learned that way. And mistakes in collecting can cost you money. So if we can help give people a bit of confidence to participate more in the hobby, that would be amazing. If we can shorten the learning curve for some and help them avoid mistakes and maybe save a little bit of money, I think that'd be pretty cool too. One of the things, though, that we do need to mention right off the bat as well is we are not doing this because we feel like we are the world's most authority in hockey cards.
No,
we try to be.
I do not think we are the world's most authoritative hockey card investors, flippers, collectors. But I'll tell you what, we definitely jumped in and we kind of have backgrounds that help us build on our love for this hobby. So this is kind of, I think it's a really good intersection of where we're at to do something like this.
So we know enough to be dangerous. Yeah. I think we know enough to hopefully share good information, but there is going to be stuff that we're going to miss. There is going to be probably some advice or best practices that we share that people might disagree with. And that's where, again, I go back to, let's talk about it. Message us. We want to have an open forum. Our only goal is to get the best information to the collectors. The second thing that I would say, Troy, is, we've talked about this for a number of months now. And inherently, when you've been in the hobby for a few years and you feel like you start to, know a decent amount, the idea of trying to present what it is to be a hockey card collector or how to understand this market to someone that's new is actually really hard. And it's been kind of daunting just to make sure that our thoughts are organized and that we're doing this in the most logical way.
Yeah.
It's something that hopefully you guys can bear with us and, again, help us kind of figure out how to best educate someone as to what the best way to participate in what we think is an amazing hobby. Okay. As far as schedule goes, there really is where the Hockey Cards Gongshow podcast, as of right now, is every Wednesday. We don't have a set schedule for these episodes. We know, I think, right, Troy, it'll be a multi-part series. Yeah,
for sure.
There's really no way we can do justice to all the facets of the hobby in one episode. We're kind of approaching it as when the schedule permits, when we want to make sure that we're prepared. So these will be a little bit, I think, less regular than the traditional podcasts that we publish. So I think the best thing to do if you enjoy part one and you're looking forward to part two, which we definitely hope is the case, make sure that you follow us on whatever podcast app you listen to us on so that you get notified right away when there's new episodes. Secondly, follow us on social media. Each time we launch a new part of the series, we'll be sure to post it and let everybody know. So whether that be Instagram at Hockey Cards Gongshow, Facebook at the same, just search Hockey Cards Gongshow, Twitter as well. That's probably the best way for people to make sure that they know when we post new podcasts in the series. I think we're done with the preamble. What did I forget, Troy? Anything?
I do not think so. You've covered all the notes. I think we're good to keep rolling.
Okay. Let's just start and talk about the hobby in general.
Yeah.
What the hobby consists of, what we see as the opportunity. And I think, to me, Troy, the most logical place to start is probably why a good portion of people are listening, what drove us back into the hobby. And it's really the incredible sports card boom that happened in, I think, probably late 2020, but really in earnest, the first part of 2021.
Yeah, we had a multitude of factors kind of converge and lead to this big explosion, which has kind of come back a little, but it's still, I mean, we can only hear about so many record sales and you kind of figure out what's going on. So yeah, it's definitely going back to that early 2021 when a lot of people started taking notice, especially the media started taking notice with how the sports card market and the hobby has booming.
I think what some of those factors were, we had a pandemic, of course. Around that time, a lot of people were homebound. You weren't able to be out and social. So I think a fair amount of people were looking for hobbies or content or ideas to occupy your time. The economy was doing pretty good, right?
Yep.
So there were stimulus programs that were putting surplus money in, not everybody's case, of course, but in some cases, in people's bank accounts. And you started to see the values of sports cards really dramatically rise. So we're talking, and if you go back to 2018, 2019, and compare values, whether it be basketball or baseball or football, to early 2021. And you had cases where cards were 10 times more valuable, or the value gone up 20 times or 30 times. What really, I think, where a lot of people will point to, I don't know if, Troy, if this would be considered the cherry on top of the sundae, but it was the Last Dance documentary that covered the 1998 Bulls championship run, really kind of set sports cards into a whole different stratosphere, especially basketball cards.
Yeah. Now I know who's it, Josh Luber from Fanatics came out with his fun white paper, and I know he wasn't as big on the whole Last Dance or the pandemic, like the lockdown, as the biggest factors. He kind of thought they were overblown, but he said they did contribute, obviously. But to me, obviously, it seemed like, the lockdown, people being, I don't want to say just bored, but there was definitely a bunch of factors that led to this. And if you look at the market, if I remember right, in October 2020-ish, it actually had a pretty severe downturn, which just led to even bigger gains once, everyone started buying again, and just led to, the 50x explosions in values. But yeah.
To me, what stands out about the early part of 2021 is it's really the first time that I started to hear the notion of sports card collecting as a legitimate, alternative asset class, right? Really a form of investment, not just kind of a sports nerd hobby.
Yeah.
People were making real money. And I think, going back to your point, Troy, that's where the media gets interested in sort of the salacious headlines, right? The all-time high sales and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's I think people started to look at the hobby differently. And you had these, and it wasn't just sports cards, it was shoes, whether it be comic books or albums, or were any of these collectibles where there were scarce pockets of the market and highly desired. In our case, right, what do people, that's sort of the sardonic way of it's cardboard pictures of sweaty men.
Oh yeah.
Right. That people really started to drive the value of some of these collectibles up. So I think that obviously poured more people into the hobby. Demand goes up, supply relatively low at the time, and of course you have big price increases. Now the market has definitely cooled since then. Right. We report a lot and we look daily at hockey card values. And one of the things that we try to do on our show and on our social media channels is, when we're showing the value of a card, we want to give you some reference points to that value. And so we'll say, well, the card is worth X today, which is up or down so-and-so percent over the last 3 months. And here's the all-time high value. So you can kind of compare to where it's at. And I know you've noticed this too, Troy, but most often those all-time high values are between January and May of 2021. And then we've seen a pretty good decrease since then. Obviously, the economy has played a little bit of a factor. It's been a rough year from a market perspective, whether it be stock market or, the housing market's starting to cool a little bit now. We have the crypto/NFT market has fallen pretty hard. And so that's driven, I think sports cards have done pretty well overall. They've generally beat all those things that we just talked about. And the hockey card market has done pretty well too. But I don't know, Troy, it kind of feels like the market to me is more normalized.
Yeah, I think it had to come back to reality for a little bit. So I think that's kind of where we're at. And now we're having an economic downturn, but now we're seeing this as an alternative asset class. So it's actually holding its value pretty well now from those highs, where it corrected itself to.
Okay, so I think that's hopefully kind of a decent overview of the big picture of the sports cards market. Obviously, we deal pretty extensively and exclusively in hockey cards. You're here to learn about hockey cards. So I think there's some important things to understand about sort of where hockey fits into the pantheon of sports cards and really card collecting in general. So first of all, sports cards are not the only cards that are collected. There's a huge other segment we'll often refer to as TCG, or trading card games. So that would be your Pokemon, your Magic the Gathering, Dragon Ball Z. Is there another big one I'm forgetting?
No, I think those are the three I usually think of when I think of the trading card games.
In a lot of ways, Pokemon is even bigger than a lot of sports cards.
Yep.
But then within sports cards exclusively, you have your three major sports are going to be baseball, basketball, football. They are overwhelmingly the most popular sports that are collected. Hockey is definitely, I don't know, Troy, what tier would you put hockey in below kind of the three?
It's below even soccer, and I don't know where soccer is worldwide. Worldwide, that might be in the top tier also, but hockey's probably, I don't know, it's probably mid-tier. I could look it up, like on Card Ladder, and see where its market volume is, but I would put it in that mid-tier.
Yeah, I had one little data point just for a frame of reference. So I looked at the August 2022 PSA submission report. So PSA is the main grading company that we'll talk about grading extensively down the road here in this series. So people that have submitted their cards to be authenticated and graded, if you look at just in August, there were 10 times as many baseball cards and basketball cards submitted to grading as hockey and 5 times as much of football cards. I mean, it's a definitive step down from those other sports. I would probably tend to agree with you, Troy, that soccer is, just from a geography perspective, right? Hockey is a cold climate sport. There's more warm climates in the world than cold climates. So hockey is typically what you see from a collecting standpoint is Canada, the US, and Scandinavian countries would be the, a little bit Eastern Europe. So like Czech Republic and stuff like that. So it's a little bit more geographically limited, but it is definitely a smaller collector base. So you're not going to see in hockey the $10 million card sales, at least at this point.
No.
Right. Or the $1.8 million Justin Herbert rookies like we had in football. But one of my favorite Saints, Troy, is high tide raises all ships. So while we don't typically see that level of sales in hockey right now, when they do occur, it just moves the ceiling up for the 1979 OPG Wayne Gretzky PSA 10, where its current high sale is $3.75 million. Now maybe to get to that $5 million mark, and everything below that to correspondingly raise as well.
Definitely.
One of the reasons why we started our podcast, and another why we're doing this series, is we're pretty bullish on the future of the hockey card market. We think there's a lot of room to grow, and I want to get your thoughts, Troy, but I'll share mine first. To me, it starts with the caliber of, and really ends with the caliber of players that are in the game right now. I think it's a hard, almost impossible task or question to answer to go back through the history of the game, going back to the 1930s in the NHL, and try to compare eras. But I don't know, I mean, if you went through that mental exercise and looked at the talent from, and I kind of put it into 3 groups, right? So you have your superstar group, which I would put the Connor McDavids and Austin Matthews and Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin. Then you have your budding superstars, so people that are close to getting into that, maybe a Jack Hughes or Kaprizov. There's probably a Cale Makar, right? Type names. Then beyond that, a huge pool of young, whether it be prospects or rookies, that are making the game really exciting. Not only the game's exciting, but I think these players are real marketable too.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's definitely the marketable piece of it, but it's also a lot of these good players are young. It seems, and I've said this on the podcast, it seems like a lot of these players are getting younger and becoming superstars at a younger age. Obviously, in the past, that's happened, but it just feels like a lot of these guys we talk about on the podcast are very young. Plus, just look at this society we're set up in right now with social media. It's just the right time. These guys can get so much exposure. And we've talked about a little bit before how hockey is really a pocket hobby where it's Canada, some of the northern states in Minnesota, Massachusetts, East Coast, and then you got the Scandinavians and some Eastern Europeans. So there's definitely a huge market to grow. And it's kind of all that's leading to being well positioned. Plus, it's a fantastic game. Might move too fast for some people, but just I always said if you can get someone just to sit down that's never watched hockey and just kind of watch it, I think they would really like it and get into it. So we're at a spot where there's so much room to grow, and I think with all the outside factors and forces, that it could grow to a huge potential.
Yeah, another thing that I want to mention, or I think opportunity for growth or reason to be bullish is, and this is a little more admittedly anecdotal, but we've heard a lot of theories about why or reasons why the sports card market in general has grown. And one of the things that we've heard is that people from other types of collectible markets, like the one you hear often is the sneakers market, where so many people get into sneakers, the manufacturers, whether it be like Nike or Adidas or whoever it is, they start to produce less to drive up scarcity, and it becomes really hard, competitive, and expensive to buy shoes. And so people then look for other similar markets that operate, I guess, in a similar fashion. And a natural evolution for many sneakerheads has been to maybe get into like basketball collecting, for example, right? Well, that kind of continues to roll downhill, right? So you get into sports cards, and maybe you gravitate, if you're not a diehard hockey fan, you gravitate to basketball or football, and certainly very soon find out how expensive those particular hobbies are. And one of the things that I think makes hockey really attractive is just the relative affordability of it compared to basketball or football collecting in general, right? If we look at box prices, so if you were to buy a hobby box, or so these are, we'll get into the difference between hobby boxes and retail boxes, but a hobby box of football or, of the top brands or basketball can run Troy? What are they? $1,500 or more?
$1,500, $2,000, $3,000 if it's a big release. Yeah, it can get crazy.
And really, hockey only has one brand called the Cup that really even gets to that level, where even the more premium brands for a hobby box are typically $500 or less. And some of the flagship products, and we'll do again as we progress in the series, a complete breakdown of what the different products are and how to understand which ones you might want to buy or collect. But even the more like flagship rookie driven products, you can buy a box in the $100 to $150 range, and it sure beats $1,500.
Yeah.
Right. So there's relative affordability in hockey, and that might change, I guess, as the hobby grows and more people get into it. But at least right now, I think that that's a big opportunity. So anything else on the market we should talk about?
No, I think we've covered the basics of the market, where we're at, where we're going, why we like hockey.
And again, what we're trying to do is cover the basics here. And so I think from the market, I don't know what the right word for this, Troy, is, if it's actors or stakeholders.
I would call it participants.
Participants. Okay. That's a good word. The types of participants of people that are in the hockey hobby or marketplace. And we kind of had, I guess, 4 main ones. The first would be the collector, which I think is the majority, probably, of the people that participate in the hobby. And so just from a definition standpoint, these are people that are not as concerned with the value of their cards. They just love a particular player or love a particular team and want to amass a collection of that player or players from that team. And they just enjoy looking and displaying and having the cards, and don't really watch, well, was this card worth $10 today and $15 next week? A term that you'll often hear associated with collecting, and it's a key term in the hobby that you hear a lot, is PC. That stands for personal collection.
Yep.
So if somebody references like Troy, you have a couple guys at UPC,
Yep.
right? Pecorine, right?
Yep. And Jake Odger. I also PC. Yeah, so
Yep.
when you hear PC, personal collection, people say a lot of times, oh, I PC so-and-so. And when you think about the collectors, too, it doesn't have to be just players or teams. You can also collect positions. There's people that collect cards with players with crazy hair, funny names. It's whatever you want. I mean, the world's your oyster when it comes to what you want a PC because it's what makes you happy and what you want to invest in. And another thing, too, I don't know if we mentioned this. I don't know if anyone listening to this is that new. But if you hear the term hobby and you're like, what does that mean? That just means the entire universe. So the hockey card hobby would be everything related to hockey cards. And if you said the sports card hobby, it's just everything encompassing sports cards. I remember first time I heard that term, I kind of did a double take. I was like, oh, okay, that's an odd term. But now that I know what it means, it makes complete sense.
We should also mention, too, that there's set collectors.
Yep.
Right? So people that love that either it's a different year or a particular type of card or subsets of cards. So within a set, there could be a insert set, as an example, that look different than the normal cards of that set. And people for a particular year might be really into collecting that, or different variations of cards. There's something called like getting all the different color combinations of a card would be the rainbow, is somebody that has the whole spectrum of those cards. And I think you hit it right on the head, Troy, right? With collecting, there's no right or wrong answer. It's 100% subjective, 0% objective, but value also does come into the equation, though, more so in this case for ability to acquire your collection at the best price, right? Because even if you don't care ultimately what the card is worth, if you can get a specific player card that you treasure for $20 instead of $40, who doesn't want to save $20?
Yeah, at the end of the day, everyone wants to get it at the best price possible. Sometimes you can't do that, and you got to bite the bullet if you really, really want the card, but we'd like to get it at the cheapest price possible.
The next group that we wanted to look at is investors. The first thing point that I'll make about investors is that most investors are collectors too, on some level, right? So that you're not like, these aren't rigid buckets that you're 100% in one and 0% in anything else, right? Most people have how they participate in the hobby, do a little bit of investing, a little bit of collecting, maybe some flipping, or maybe really all the different types of participation. But from an investor perspective, and this is the category I fall more into, then even though I do a little bit of PC collecting as well, is looking to build value in cards and really kind of drive interest and joy from finding that or identifying that player that you think is on the come up or is about to have a breakthrough, or maybe the value is down for reasons that you think are unrelated to production, and you can get a good deal today and maybe buy that card for $10 and 6 months later it's worth $20, right? Or there's the lottery fantasy of that really, I think, drives a lot of the hobby, frankly, Troy, where you get that rookie today that maybe cost you $100 and 8 years down the road, it's being sold for $100,000, right? I don't know. What do you do you think, if you had to guess, just based on what you know of collecting and the collectors out there, where do you think it's more heavily collectors in hockey cards?
I think it's way more heavily collectors, especially in the hockey card market, I feel. But it's also because I feel every investor is also a collector. I think it's very low the people that are just investing in hockey cards or flip. And we'll get to the next group of flippers, but I would think the collectors are a majority of it is collectors, but with some investors just focusing on making the money. And I always equate this, you think of investing, just think of it as like, instead of the stock market or buying stock of companies, you're just buying stocks or you're buying hockey cards. Same kind of, if you need to make the kind of analogy, it's the same thing.
Sure.
It's a different asset class.
Well, I think, too, you just alluded to a really great point that the hockey card community is a lot more collector-driven than other sports might be, especially like basketball, or I think in football, where we've seen a lot of people that have more of that short-term mindset where they're really motivated to spend 100, create 1,000 and get out.
Yep.
Right. Where there's just such I think a bigger collector base in hockey. And that's at least been our observation. So it's good to know, I think, as you're getting into the hobby. So the next type of participant would be a flipper. I think that this term, I was thinking a lot about this, Troy, has really, in a lot of ways, maybe unfairly so in some cases, developed a little bit of a negative connotation over the past year or two, and primarily due to the retail flippers. So the idea in flipping is very short term, right? I can go to, and we saw this a lot during the pandemic when, one of the byproducts of the big boom in sports card collecting is the retail supply got to almost nothing. So whether you shop at Target or Walmart or some other store, almost the second the shelves were stocked for a while, people would be lined up starting at 3 a.m, waiting for cards. And most of these people were not collectors. They were trying to buy a blaster box, a $20 blaster box at Target, and sell it for $60 online. Right. And so there's a lot of hard feelings about that. And, people that wanted to buy cards that were more collector driven, that probably in some cases were maybe a little bit bitter that they didn't get the cards to make the quick cash. To me, maybe it's the whole concept of flipping has gotten a little bit of a bad rap because there's a whole other part of flipping too that I think is really important to understand. And these are people that buy maybe collections from people, whether it be off like Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or from family connections, and then maybe piece that, in a lot of ways, Troy, a local card shop is really in the flipping business. Right? They're getting their inventory from collectors and trying to buy cheap and sell for higher. And so, there's a fair amount of people in the hobby that, like I said, buy low, quick return, sell high.
Yeah, I mean, and we could equate a flipper to maybe a short-term investor. I don't know. I mean, if the word flipping, some people don't like it. You hear about house flippers. Well, it's not like they buy a house and then next week sell it. They buy a house, do some renovations, and then sell it. So I don't know. I get the term. To me, it's just short-term investors is how I look at it. Now, there are some people that probably try to find really good deals on eBay and flip it the next day, or flip it when they get the card in, like 7 days later, if they find some misspellings or just crazy stuff like that. But I just look at flippers as short-term investors.
I would agree with that. So the last group of participants, and we left out like companies and corporations in this.
Yeah, that was my next one. If we didn't get, I was going to say, well, there's probably a whole group of businesses that are involved. Yeah, but that would go down a rabbit hole. We don't want to.
So the last group is breakers. Now, breakers can technically there are some pretty big businesses that are into card breaking, but most breakers are just collectors that are found an opportunity to make some money. Yeah. We will do a pretty extensive dive into breaking overall, but wanted to bring it up at this point in our process to at least definitionally cover what breaking is. So the whole concept of breaking is, as we talked about a few minutes ago, especially in other sports, but definitely in hockey too, that certain boxes of cards, which here's another term, wax. If anybody mentions the term wax, it's buying a sealed box of cards that, especially on the hobby side. And so there's retail products that are typically sold in your Walmarts or grocery stores or Targets or lids in the case of like a Fanatics. And then there's hobby specific cards that are sold through local card shops, through online sport card specific retailers. And the key thing to understand is that the hobby versions will typically have the more exclusive cards. Is that the best way to put it, Troy?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say better, but they'll have usually different inserts. The retails might not have as many exclusives. The retail product might have one exclusive parallel or insert, where the hobby box will have a lot more of them usually, and I'll say the better type of parallel or insert. And we'll talk what parallel inserts are later.
So what a breaker does is they will buy hobby boxes or cases of hobby boxes that are, in a lot of cases, unaffordable for the average collector. Remember, we were talking a minute ago about whether it be basketball for $1,500 or $2,000 a box, or hockey $300, $400, $500 a box. A lot of times these boxes are definitely a risk reward proposition. If you spend $400 on a hockey box, there's not a guarantee you're going to get $400 worth of cards. And so a way to enable people to open cards, because that's a big part of this hobby, is opening packs of cards, and lower the risk a little bit, is this concept of breaking, where I'll buy 5 boxes and sell the spots in what's called a break. So spots are usually by team or by player, right? So if it's in the case of by team, there'd be, now with the Kraken, right, 32 spots in a break. And maybe if I don't have $500 to buy the box, I can spend maybe $20 for team and get all the cards from that team. So breakers are people that would go onto platforms. You see people breaking on YouTube, on whatnot, in Facebook groups, on TikTok now. We've heard of some people, and it's a very, very large part of the hobby. And I think, it seems like, Troy, it's growing.
Well, it's definitely growing. Definitely growing.
So, we felt it was really important to list them as one of the kind of the key participants in the hobby. I know it's a hard thing to introduce the concept of breaking, because that's another, like you said, where you could spend an hour easy going through, but just maybe introduce the topic now. In trying to understand the big picture of hockey card collecting, the next thing that we wanted to mention pretty briefly, but it is important, is geography matters in hockey cards, probably more so than any other sport. Sorry to any of our friends in Florida. We love it. It's beautiful, but there's not going to be, at least today, a real big, strong, vibrant hockey card community. You're going to have to find maybe more people online to interact with, or smaller pockets of collectors, where if you're in Montreal or Toronto, it's not a problem finding a card show or a card shop that has a lot of boxes of cards or singles. So in the United States, it's typically going to be the northern states, and in Canada, it's all over. And I think that there's Scandinavia, it seems like, from what we've heard from people, is more regional or pockets as well. It seems like Sweden has a decent, I think, collecting community, if I remember correctly. Okay. I think at this point we've kind of tried to cover the big picture. And now I think is where we want to at least start in this episode, the process of trying to help you figure out how to get more involved and really start your, whether it be collecting or investing journey. And so I think maybe a good place to do that, Troy, is to start with the maybe general rules of thumb or advice that we could give people, having gone through this ourselves a little bit ago. And I guess I'll just start out by saying, and you chime in too, to me, it's make it fun. Don't overextend yourself, definitely financially. For all the good, Troy, that the sports card boom of 2021 did, it kind of also, there were some negatives. And one of those is that it created this perception that it's easy money, right? That you can't go wrong. Oh, you'll turn $100 into $1,000 in 3 days. And if you were listening to this with that being your plan, sorry to disappoint you, but it's not that easy. It's impossible. We're talking about hockey players that have, that are human beings, and their performance goes up and down. They get injured. They get into different situations. They have life complications off the ice. There's this mythical thing that we'll talk a lot about later called hype that drives, I don't know, Troy, what is what percentage of value do you think is hype? 50% of value?
Probably more than that. I mean, of newer players for sure. 99% for rookies.
Yeah, where you can't even explain why a certain card is, there's nothing on the ice that is justified that person having the value they do other than they've had hype for a number of years. And so to me, Troy, it's, the best place to start is to do what interests you, try your best to kind of collect for fun, even if you have a value mindset, but you'll be more successful doing it that way.
Yeah, I mean, just don't get in this thinking you're going to retire from it. I mean, yes, some people probably have, but you've got to put a lot of work and effort if you're thinking about making a lot of money. Yes, you can make some money if you're smart about it, but just remember, just like any kind of investment or financial decision, there's going to be ups and downs and all that stuff. And personally, how I got back into it was 6-7 years ago, buying hockey cards with my kids at Target or Walmart or whatever. And we were just kind of getting back into it, kind of doing something for fun. And that's kind of what led me back into it to start. Then with everything that happened with the economy getting going and the big boom, really getting back into it.
And the people that have made a lot of money, I'm not trying to disparage anyone's knowledge or abilities here, but I would be willing to bet in many of those cases that, and again, this is not a slight, that luck played a big factor. I'll give everybody an example. There's a certain type of hockey insert. It's called Essential Credentials. It's from mainly the really valuable ones are from a 2020, I think, Fleer set EX. And those cards, Troy, I don't have the values in front of me, but so they came on 2012-ish, 2010, 2012, something like that. You could have bought those for like a Wayne Gretzky for, I don't know, $50 5 years ago. That's now worth $50,000. Yeah. Nobody that bought that card at $50 said, I think this card is going to be $50,000 in 2022. Yep. Right? They just, at the end of the day, they did make a good choice. They picked a great looking card that was scarce and kind of meets all the criteria of something that can deliver value. So again, it's not trying in any way to say that it's 100% luck, but there's a big part of luck involved that I think when you have those big time breakthrough, nobody ever thought a defenseman like Cale Makar would sort of break through that sort of what people, I don't know what you call it, Troy. It's typically defensemen are not valued other than Bobby Orr.
Yeah.
In hockey. And so, you could have made a lot of money on Cale Makar the last few years, but his value has come from him doing something that a player really hasn't done in since Orr played 40 years or more, right? So the more you get into it, just have fun, I think that actually increases your chances to make money. The next thing that I'll say is this is a hobby where you benefit from learning before acting. And that's a mistake that I probably made a few years ago. There's the old saying, right? When you're building something, whether like you're building a shed in your backyard or something where it's measure twice, cut once, do your research. A lot of the platforms that sell to us as collectors really take advantage of the impulsivity that a lot of us have, whether it be eBay auctions that have timed endings where it draws on your competitiveness, or breaking where there's this sort of fun community aspect of it. And so my point, Troy, is I think you can get pretty easily swept into doing some kind of financially dumb stuff.
Oh, definitely. Like we've all made dumb decisions with this stuff. Like you said, eBay auctions. Personally, like I always want to win them. When all the ones that I watch, I wait till the end, and I usually try to win it, even though it might not be the best financial decision. But it's learning from our information from past mistakes.
Yeah, I've definitely done that too, where I've gotten swept up in the competitive nature of an auction, and the next morning been looking at this card that I bought, and I paid $47 when every other sale is $30, and you're like, oh, this was not smart. Yeah.
Well, just think of like breaks too. I mean, it's fun. You hang out, you're talking, oh, buy a team here, buy a team here. Before you know it, you've bought in 15 different teams in like 10 different breaks. And then your credit card bill comes and you're like, whoa, I did not remember doing all that.
Yeah, and they make it really easy to buy.
Yeah.
Like Whatnot is a great platform where and there's other platforms too, where it's essentially one-click buying, where they've worked hard to remove all the barriers that or the obstacles that would trigger you to think, is this a smart thing to do? And it's just no, it's just kind of satisfying that impulsivity and wanting to get that now. So do your research. The other little, I guess, note that I would add to there too is another, I think perception that the early 2021 boom in sports cards created is that every card can go up in value, because they kind of did.
Yeah.
Right. Where now, as the markets sort of come back to earth a little bit, if you're looking to get into a hockey card of your favorite player, so let's say it's Cole Caulfield, right, who was one of the big rookies last season, not every Cole Caulfield card is going to have the opportunity to be worth tons of bucks someday, right? And so it's forced collectors to be more discerning, smarter about the cards that you choose to buy. And in order to do that, you just need to have more information. You need to understand sort of what the, I think we'll refer to as like the flagship rookies or the flagship cards of a particular player are. So you're going to benefit by taking the time to learn there. Next thing, from a where to start perspective, ask for help. This sounds like totally cliche, but what was really apparent and I think even tangible is how nice in general hockey card collectors are, especially not that people that collect baseball cards or basketball cards
yelling at the whole time.
Nice, but it is. I think that there is a definite difference, and my point is use that to your advantage. So don't be shy to connect with people, to reach out respectively, of course, but to ask questions, to participate in communities, and you will learn a ton from other people.
Yeah, part of it's just getting up the nerve to ask. And that's kind of, when I first started, that's something I struggled with. I figured I would just learn it all myself. I don't need to ask anyone for help. I'll figure it out eventually. But once you go on, there's some things you don't know, and you got to ask. And whether it be, we'll get into like different communities and stuff, or aspects of where you can go, like a local card shop, or where to talk to people. Just ask once you find the right avenue to get connected with other collectors and hockey card investors.
Absolutely. I think the last sort of part that we'll cover, at least in part one here, is how best to start participating in the hobby, right? As we've kind of established as the term that we use to reference collecting, and what are your avenues to learn about maybe the collection that you had as a kid or inherited from someone or bought off marketplace, or you want to go buy new boxes of cards or new I guess now's another good time to interject a new term, a single, right? So when you hear the word single, that's mainly people referencing one specific card versus buying a box of cards that someone would open. So how to best participate, how to start, where to join. I think, and the reason, Troy, in our notes, why I put this first is I think the best place to start is the local card shop level. So another term you'll hear a lot, LCS.
Yep.
Right? When you hear that, people are talking about local card shop. That's a term, Troy, that I remember about 6 months. For 6 months, I had no idea what people meant by LCS.
I guess, and I didn't either, and just figured I'd figure it out eventually, and then realized one day it was probably local card shop.
And I guess the reason why I put that on the top of the list is, number one, I just personally love the idea of supporting local businesses. Local card shops are very much local. Other than sort of the big box retailers that have more of that retail driven product SKUs, where the local card shops will have more, they'll have a mix of retail, but they'll primarily be more hobby, is these aren't chains or corporations. These are collectors that have an entrepreneurial spirit and create a card shop. And so it's always good to go in and support those in your local community. If they're good at what they do, they'll be personable. Go in, introduce yourself, tell them you're a new collector, right? Ask them to, there's lots of different products out there, and we'll get into that a little bit as we progress through this series, but it can be very much overwhelming to walk into a card shop and see 16 different types of hockey cards and try to understand, well, why is this box $100 and this other box $500? Why do I get 8 cards in one box and 24 packs with 8 cards each pack in another box? Why does this box have 1 card? Right. And what my experience, Troy, has been is that most local card shops or hobby shops will definitely take the time and help educate you a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And along with that, if you're worried about pricing, hey, LCSs or local card shops are probably the best place to negotiate at times on some things, or you will usually have competitive pricing compared to some of the online stuff. Now, sometimes they won't be as good, but it never hurts to go in and you can always ask and see if they're willing to come down on pricing. And especially if you're looking at cards themselves, like singles, you see the cards in the cases with the price, you can always negotiate or talk.
One super important thing to know about buying cards, and especially boxes or wax, is that there is no universal pricing. This is a hugely important concept because, and I think what would the term be, like MSRP, like manufacturer's suggested retail price. Like, we're used to walking into a Target and seeing a tube of Colgate or toothpaste or a box of macaroni and cheese and knowing that, well, it may be a little bit different at Walmart, but it's going to be, if it's 99 cents at Target, it might be 89 cents or 94 cents at Walmart, but it'll generally be in the same price range. Unfortunately, that does not exist in the sports card world. So if you do go into a local card shop, or you are looking online at an online retailer and there's a box of cards that you're interested in and the price is $400, you can't assume carte blanche that's sort of the set price. And that's one of the, as a consumer and collector in the hobby, that's one of the really big challenging points, is because you might walk into a local card shop and see a box of Upper Deck Black Diamond that you really want, where they have it listed for $450, and a shop 5 miles down the road might have it for $350. Yep. So this is where I go back to measure twice, cut once. Do your research before you just buy. And we'll talk about really specifically how to comp, how to do price research. But there are places, even if you're in a card shop and you're like, oh, I'm really interested in this box, I don't know if this is the best price, where you can just use your phone, go and check, do some price comps, and I guess give yourself some insurance that the price that they're asking is fair. And then to your point, Troy, if somebody's charging $400 for a box and it's $350 in most places, you can negotiate. They might always say no, but it doesn't hurt to ask. So if they'd be willing to.
It's not like they're going to throw you out of the place for asking for a cheaper price. So it's one of the things. Hey, I'll be honest. It's one of the things I struggle with. I still struggle with it. It's like I don't think it's a lot of humans' nature to negotiate. Even though some people can walk, like my dad is one of those people that can just walk in and start. He'll have the box down half price in about 5 minutes because it's just how he is. He's a salesman. It's something you got to get over, and if you want a way to save money, that's a way to save money.
Important point to make here too is the same thing applies to singles. If you really love Kirill Kaprizov and you want one of his 2020 Young Guns, and I mention this card specifically because and Troy knows this, he's been with me, we've gone to card shops and card shows and checked on eBay, and there can be you can go to a card. The card maybe sells for $125 on eBay. You'll go to a card show and somebody's asking $300 for it, right? And so, number one, it's important to know what the value is so you don't make a mistake and spend $300 on it. Sometimes, and you can negotiate on the singles and card shops too. They may say no, and you might decide to buy the card anyways, because you might think, well, I can see this one in front of me. I can gauge the condition a lot better than maybe looking at a card for sale on Facebook or Instagram or eBay or another auction site. So it's worth it to me. But then at least you're making an informed decision. So if you can, go to local card shops. I guess last thing at card shops, which is what we've kind of already talked about from the geography standpoint, this might be more challenging in certain areas, depending on where you live. We're in Minnesota, so we have a fair amount of hockey. In Canada, it's normally not a problem. But if you're in the southern U.S. or hockey crazy areas, you might struggle to find hockey cards, I guess, at your local card shop. But you could ask, and I'm sure people would tell you what shops around you might have more hockey or not. Okay, so the next way to participate, we mentioned a little bit, is in card shows. And I think, Troy, I can speak for the both of us. This is probably the area that we still have a little bit of the least experience in. We're catching up. If you listen to the Gong Show, our regular podcast, Troy's been on a little bit of a world tour lately, trying to catch up on his knowledge a little bit. There's really two types of card shows. There's local card shows, and then more like regional and national. Big national or international show, I guess, in the form of hockey is the Sports Card Expo in Toronto. That happens twice a year. The next one's coming up so we're recording this on September 16th of 2022. So I think right just under 2 months from now is the big Toronto Expo. But not everyone has the ability or the desire to spend the money or participate in the hobby at that level where they'd want to go to Toronto. So really the more realistic is in more of the local card shows. And that goes back to really participating in your local community. Sometimes they're a little hidden and hard to find, Troy. But I think starting at the card shop, the LCS, is a great way, and ask the owners, like, hey, are there card shows around here? Or how do I find more information? Those are a great spot. And they're still pretty basic. I don't know how you describe the hockey collecting universe, or in sports cards in general, is getting more corporate-y, but it still is largely, maybe a good way to put it, Troy, is a card show is a lot like a flea market.
Yeah, for sure.
Right, where you just have collectors or investors or flippers that can buy a table. They bring their collection. A lot of times they're in cases. And what you'll find at a card show is it's a great place to not only buy cards. A lot of dealers or other collectors will trade, or in a lot of cases, they'll purchase your cards. So you can sell cards there too. So I don't know, is there any, from a 10,000 foot perspective, on card shows that
that's the basic gist of a card show.
Okay. The last area we'll talk about is social media. Tons, and I don't know if 80% of the hobby probably exists on social media now. And the thing that's interesting to me, Troy, is that there's different pockets, or I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but you can see that how collectors and investors use different types of social platforms for different reasons. So just to give from a broad brushstroke perspective, there's a really healthy hockey card community on Instagram. What you'll see collectors typically doing are really showing off their collection, connecting with other collectors. And then Instagram too is a pretty decent selling platform, especially through Instagram stories, if you're familiar with that, where once you've built enough followers, it gives you a audience of collectors that you can reach, and you can try to sell your cards. That we'll get much more into how to safely do that down the road. But that's, I think, the main ways that people use Instagram. Facebook groups in particular are really more buy sell, right? And so you can go in, people post their cards, and then try to negotiate safe deals from that perspective. Reddit, if you're a Reddit user, has a R Hockey Cards subreddit that I think is more informational almost. There's a little bit of showing off my collection, but more discussions that can, anyone that's been on Reddit knows it can.
I said we're definitely like, I mean, we do put some stuff on there, but you kind of step back and just observe most of the time. But when we have something to put out, we'll put some stuff on there. Just be ready to know that the Reddit hive mind is a real thing. Not that we've experienced it, but just know that going in.
And then there, and a lot of these follow demographics too that you typically see and how people are distributed among social platforms. But of course, TikTok has been, over the last 2 years, the big emerging platform. You're seeing more and more uses of TikTok. To me, what's been interesting about that is this is more the vlogging style almost of sports card collecting, where a lot of it's very personality driven. And so, there's a very healthy community that you can build on TikTok, and then YouTube, of course. There's a lot of content creators that's more content creators and publishing, and a lot of individual collecting or connecting via YouTube. Any other social platforms I missed?
Oh, I'm sure there's some, but these are the big ones, right? If you're going to start with the couple, these are the ones you start with.
Yeah. And then I guess maybe the last one is a shameless plug, but hey, participate in the hockey card community, listen to the Hockey Cards Gongshow podcast, Definitely. Right? Yep. And follow our social channels where, we try to encourage and a lot of discussion and debate. And, one of our stated goals when we started our brand, or really, I guess you would call it, is to not only help educate people a little bit, help people learn, but learn ourselves. And we think that continuous learning is really important. And so we hope that you will follow us on our journey there too and participate with us in that way. We'll try. I don't know about you, but I think at this point we've kind of covered our main goals for part
that's
one.
the good. It's a lot of high level stuff, but it's a good stopping point for the first episode.
Yeah. So we definitely do plan to get into the details and to get into specifics, but we felt it's really important to lay the foundation for what we hope to accomplish with the series. And we'll look forward sometime soon to getting into, those, what are the best research sites? How do I find the value of my cards? How do I know, how is value determined in cards, right? To how do I, if I want to grade in condition and buying, selling, all that good stuff. So we'll look forward to digging that into part 2. Thank everyone for listening. If we missed anything, any big overview concepts, be sure to not only follow us on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, but let us know, and we'll, in our sort of review of last week's episode, or last part, or part 1, we'll be sure to cover that, and see you again soon on part 2 of Hockey Cards 101.